The morning was cold enough to sting, yet Rio was already kneeling in the courtyard before the first light touched the mountain ridge. His breath came out in white clouds, his hands steady on his sword. The world was silent except for the distant cry of a crow and the rustle of bamboo. Every day, for 3 years, he had done the same thing. Rise before dawn, practice his cuts, and repeat the same movements until his arms ached and his mind turned blank. But today was different. Today he had decided to quit. He stared at his sword resting in the snow, a thin line of steel reflecting the faint dawn light, and thought, what's the point? His friends in the village had already moved on, chasing comfort, money, and warmth, while he remained stuck in endless repetition. He felt like he was falling behind in a race no one else seemed to be running. Then, from behind, his old master's voice broke through the quiet. "If you can give me 10 minutes, the old man said softly, I'll show you how to beat 98% of people." Rio turned, confused. 10 minutes? After years of practice, could something so small make any difference? The old master, Daizen, walked slowly toward him, his gray robes brushing softly against the snow. "You train every day," he said, "but your heart grows restless. You mistake repetition for progress. True discipline begins when the mind grows silent inside the storm." Rio frowned. "But master, I've done everything. Early mornings, endless drills, no rest. Yet I still feel weak." Daizen nodded. "That's because you seek strength, not clarity. You want to conquer the world before you've learned to conquer a single moment." He picked up Rio's sword and drew a line in the snow. "This line is your limit. Most people stop here. They train until they grow tired, then call it enough. They work until frustrated, then surrender. But those who walk even one step past this line, just a few minutes more, find a truth others never touch." He handed the sword back. "Give me 10 minutes. Do not think of victory or time or pain. Simply continue." Rio hesitated, but something in his master's eyes held him still. So he began again, raising the sword, cutting through the air. The sound of steel slicing the wind echoed through the courtyard. 1 minute passed, then 2. His arms trembled. The cold bit at his skin. He wanted to stop, to breathe, to rest. But Daizen's words replayed in his mind. Those who go 10 minutes beyond. At the 6th minute, his body screamed. At the 8th, he no longer felt his hands. At the 10th, something shifted, not in his muscles, but in his mind. The world grew distant, quiet, still. The sword no longer felt heavy. It moved as if guided by something deeper than will. When he finally stopped, his breathing was steady, his eyes clear. Daizen smiled. "Now you've met your true self, the one who exists beyond comfort." That night, Rio sat by the fire, thinking about those 10 minutes. It wasn't the time that mattered, he realized, but what it represented. The point where most people stop. 98% of the world, his master had said, lives inside the boundary of comfort. They chase results, praise, and shortcuts. They seek discipline as a tool, not a path. But those who walk a little further, who endure the boredom, the pain, the silence, find mastery not in the act itself, but in the transformation of spirit. Rio understood that beating 98% of people wasn't about competing with them. It was about outlasting the weaker version of himself that wanted to quit. The next morning, he woke even earlier. The snow had melted slightly, and a pale mist drifted over the village. He practiced again, cut after cut, step after step. When his body reached its breaking point, he pushed for 10 minutes more. Each day, those 10 minutes became his quiet rebellion against mediocrity. Over weeks, something strange happened. The villagers began to notice. His movements grew sharper, cleaner, more fluid. Even his posture changed. When asked how he improved so quickly, he said only 10 minutes. They laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But Daizen smiled, knowing exactly what it meant. As the seasons changed, Rio carried that principle beyond the dojo. When he worked in the fields, he stayed 10 minutes longer. When studying texts by candlelight, he read 10 minutes more. When fatigue whispered, he answered with stillness. Over time, those extra moments compounded, not as effort but as character. The habit of pushing beyond comfort had rewired something within him. He no longer sought motivation. He became it. He began to see that life's battles were rarely lost to weakness, but to hesitation. People didn't fail because they lacked skill. They failed because they stopped when it hurt. One day, Daisen took him to the mountains. They climbed for hours in silence, snow crunching beneath their feet. At the summit, overlooking the valley, the master said, "Rio, do you know why most men fail?" Rio shook his head. "Because they mistake movement for progress," Daisen replied. "They chase big victories, yet ignore the small ones hidden inside each day. But the path of mastery is quiet. It's found in 10 extra minutes, the space between giving up and going on. In that space, a man discovers who he truly is." Rio looked out over the endless white peaks, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside. Years passed. Rio became known across the region as the disciplined samurai, the one who never rushed, never faltered, never complained. But his mastery wasn't built from talent or brilliance. It was forged in those unnoticed 10-minute battles, repeated thousands of times. People sought his secret. They asked for methods, techniques, shortcuts. But he always said the same thing: stay 10 minutes longer. To him, that was everything, the distillation of the samurai spirit into a single act of persistence. When Daisen grew old and ill, Rio sat beside him through his final nights. One evening, as the master's breathing grew shallow, he whispered, "You have surpassed me." Rio shook his head. "I only walked a few minutes further each day." Daisen smiled faintly. "And that," he said, "is the way. Remember, discipline is not suffering, it's devotion. When the body says stop and the mind says continue, that is when spirit is born." Those were his last words. After Daisen's passing, Rio built a small dojo overlooking the valley. Above its entrance, he carved a simple inscription, 10 minutes beyond. Students came from distant provinces to learn from him. He didn't teach them grand sword techniques or mystical philosophies. When a student grew tired, Rio would say, "Just 10 minutes more." Many thought it was pointless at first, but those who stayed, who learned to persist beyond resistance, changed not only their skill, but their being. One of them, a young boy named Kenta, once asked, "Master, when will I become great?" Rio smiled and replied, "When you stop asking and start staying." In time, Kenta understood. He saw that greatness was not an achievement, but a habit of attention. The one who gives a little more each day quietly surpasses the one who seeks instant perfection. 10 minutes was not about time. It was a doorway into something infinite. When Rio grew old, he often sat outside the dojo, watching the sunrise. His students would practice in the courtyard, their breath forming mist in the cold air. Sometimes he would see one of them trembling, ready to stop, and he'd whisper softly, "Just 10 minutes." The same words his master had once spoken to him echoed through generations. And every time someone pushed beyond that invisible line, they touched a truth that most never find, that excellence is not a gift, but a choice repeated daily in silence. In his final years, Rio reflected on his journey. He realized that the world was full of people chasing easy victories, quick recognition, and constant comfort. But few understood that the secret to mastery, peace, and fulfillment was hidden in the discipline of small moments. 10 minutes of focus, 10 minutes of courage, 10 minutes of persistence, each one an act of rebellion against mediocrity. He smiled, knowing that those minutes had shaped his entire life. When he passed away, his students found a single line written in his notebook: "If you can stay 10 minutes longer than the rest, you will not only win, you will understand." And so, they continued his teaching, passing it down through generations. The philosophy spread far beyond the dojo, reaching farmers, artists, craftsmen, and thinkers. Everyone who heard it realized that mastery was within reach, not through brilliance or luck, but through the humble act of not quitting when it's easiest to stop. The story of Rio and his 10 minutes became legend, a whisper among those who sought purpose in a distracted world. And even now, centuries later, The lesson remains unchanged. Discipline is not about perfection. It's about staying when others leave, enduring when others give up, giving 10 minutes more when your mind says you can't. That is how you beat 98% of people. That is how you find yourself.